Hey everyone, I'm Julian of Julian Creates, and welcome back to my sewing room, where today we'll be sewing my new latest Know Me pattern, Know Me 2079, as we can see here. This is a double-breasted shirt, as well as a pair of asymmetrical fly front pants, which I'm really excited to make, especially because this is something that you normally do not see in a lot of menswear. The pants really came from after seeing Marcia's pants of Kichibi Style, where she did the last season before last, where she did the asymmetrical cargos. I loved that detail. And I saw it actually before it even came out in pattern in real life when we met for Friendsgiving, what, maybe a year or two ago? So when I saw that, I was like, I love that idea and wanted to also see it in menswear. And with the top, I was seeing some of these different double-breasted tops with like traditional lapels and stuff like that I thought was a really great addition with these pants. And depending on the fabric that you choose, you can get so many different vibes and looks with your pattern. We're going to start with view A, which is the top, and I'm going to show you it a little bit different than what you see here. Here I used a stretch cotton sateen, so it had a little bit of give and a little bit more structure. This time I'm going to use a recycled rayon, so it's going to be a little bit more of a drapier fit. Remember, this is oversized, so definitely pay attention to the back of your packet so that you can decide on which side is going to work best for you. We're going to start again with view A, so let's get started. All right, so in order to construct view A of this pattern, there are 8 pattern pieces that you're going to need. You will need piece number 1, which is our front. You're going to cut 2. Piece number 2 is our back. You're going to cut 1 on the fold. Piece 3 is our upper collar. You're going to cut 1 on the fold plus 1 of interfacing on the fold. Piece 4 is our under collar. You're going to cut 1 on the fold. Piece 5 are our front facing. You're going to cut 2 of these as well as 2 of interfacing. 6 is our sleeves. You're going to cut 2 of these. And as you can already see, I've cut out my fabric, but this is our continuous lap. You're going to cut 2 of these, and these are cut on the bias. So instead of going along the grain of your fabric that way, you'll follow this arrow here to make sure you're following the grain directions needed for your fabric. Finally, you'll need piece 8, which is our cuff. You'll cut 2 of these as well as 2 of interfacing. So once you have cut out all your pieces and interface those that need the interfacing, meet me at the machine and we'll get started. All right, to get us started, we're going to start with reinforcing the areas that will be used in the lapels and the collar on both our front as well as on our facing. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've gone ahead and marked all of my dots. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start here and go an inch up, inch over, as well as reinforce here with some reinforced stitching. I don't need to do it here. So just these 2 here on our front pieces. And then I'm going to do the same on my interfacing. And don't you love that my pen coordinates with the rest of my fabric? All right, let's go over to the machine and take care of this. So today I am sewing on a Pfaff Ambition 620. Let me tell you the story of this machine and why I'm using it today. So I won this machine on shopgoodwill.com some a few months ago by accident because I was like, I want to give it a try. Didn't think I would win, made a bid, still won it. But it is perfect because it coordinates with the fabric that I'm using. So we're using this today. I am using a regular needle, regular straight stitch to do this, and we're using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance unless otherwise marked. So we're going to start by reinforcing at the dots. So once I've done the reinforcement stitches on my front pieces as well as my front facing, we are going to start with just the fronts, and we are going to connect them to the back piece at the shoulder seams, matching our notches. Going to sew a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, the pattern would have you also go ahead and do the side seams. I like to wait to do the side seams because I like to put in my sleeves flat. So what we're going to focus on is just sewing together our fronts and our backs at the shoulder seams for right now. I'm also going to go ahead and use my serger just to finish this top edge. Makes it easier for me instead of having to go back and do some finishing later. Once I've done that, we are then going to go and do a stay stitch along this back neckline. So now I went ahead and added my fronts to my back, and then I went ahead and serged it and pressed my seam allowances to the back, as well as stay stitched my neck edge, my back and neck edge. So this is our front and our back, so our body piece without the side seams done. So we're going to put this to the side and start working on our collar. So we're going to start with our upper collar piece. What I have gone ahead and done is made sure I marked all of my dots as well as my notches that I can see in the fabric through the interfacing. So what they tell you to do on the pattern is they want you to add some ease stitching or some stitches that you can use for gathering. You're going to go from this knot near the corner or near the point down to this dot and to your notches on either side. You basically are doing 2 lines of gathering stitches so that you can use that for easing. Then at the top here, you are going to go ahead and do a line of like stay stitching almost at 5/8 of an inch. And once you do that, you are going to cut between these 2 dots. So the two small dots here, and I made a line here so I can see where I'm supposed to be cutting at. And we are going to fold that edge back at 5/8 of an inch and then trim it down to 1/4. So let me go ahead and take care of that, and then we'll start putting the collar together. So now that I've gone ahead and did that ease stitching, I've gone ahead and pinned both the under and over collars together, making sure that I match my dots as well as my notches here. And what we're going to do is we're going to go from the large dot down and around along this double notched edge, sewing it at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once we have then done that, we are going to understitch the seam allowances to the under collar. So once I got done doing along the double notched edge to the dots on the sides, I then went and understitched the under collar piece and turned it out. So now that this piece is turned out, we are going to go ahead and baste all the raw edges shut to basically the dot here on either side. And then we'll start working on attaching this to the actual shirt body. So now we're going to start the process of attaching our collar to our shirt. So the way that we do that is we are going to take our collar piece and we're going to put upper collar right side to the body of the shirt. And we are going to match at our large dot, our small dot, and our notches on either side of our collar. So if you did your basting using your notches as guides, basically you could use that line of stitching. You will know where your dots match. So this dot matches basically right to the edge of our collar, going all the way to this side where it matches at the junction point when we start to turn. So we're going to just sew here, and on this side, just sew here. So between the dots, reinforcing at either side. Then we'll start to worry about the next piece, but just do that part first. All right, so we went ahead and sewed on from our dot to our next dot. And here I felt like I wasn't getting as close as I want to, so I went back in and just did a little bit more. What you can also do is you can go ahead and do like a tailor's tack or a hand stitch to match up your dots at either edge so that you make sure that you are getting exactly where you want to go. And you know, if it's not exactly what you want, there's nothing a little hand stitching can't fix. So once we have done that on both sides, we are now going to go and stitch this down at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance in the center. Now you might want to sew it from this edge to make sure that you are keeping all of this facing out the way, and you're not stitching that down. So I'm probably going to take my pins and replace them to the other side, just so I can make sure that everything is going to be right in place, but I can still see where my dots are, and we can sew along this edge. Again, at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, before we go to our next step, this is something I like to do when I'm sewing, especially something that is precise at some of those corners. I like to just go in, take a little look-see, make sure we on the right track. Now, there are some extra stitches I might have to take out, but there are some like the basting stitches and the stuff like that. But you know, we just want to check to make sure we all right. Not pressing it or anything yet. We're just checking. All right. So we can still make sure that this is open. This all looks good. All right. So as you can see here, there are some extra little stitches I'm probably going to have to take out once we're done. But we're going to keep that like this for right now. Now we're going to start working on our facing pieces. Now looking at our facing pieces, we've already gone ahead and did the reinforcement stitches. I have not clipped into this, but we are going to clip to that line of stitching, not through it. But before we do that, we're going to go ahead and finish this raw curved edge. And this is the unnotched edge. What I like to do is I'm going to go ahead and serge this edge and then fold it in and top stitch it down, giving it a nice clean finish on the inside. We're going to do that to both sides, and then we're going to start working on attaching it to the front. All right, so I went ahead and finished that curved edge. Like I said, I used my serger and just used a regular 4-thread and then pressed it right along that stitching line, top stitched it down. And now we're ready to start trying to connect this to the rest of the shirt. And again, we've already went ahead and reinforced at our dots, and we clipped two, not through that dot and that line of stitching. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that our collar is down facing the rest of the shirt. So the collar, you want the collar to be sandwiched in between. And normally what I do is I know that my first dot is here. So I'm matching that dot, matching that edge, and then looking at this and looking at where that pivot is so that I can then pin this all together. What I also went ahead and did was I went ahead and folded over this little piece at the top of it so that it can be stitched down and kind of looks finished when I put it towards the shoulder. And we are going to go ahead and make sure that all of my dots and stuff match all the way down. Now here, what they tell you to do between this dot here to this notch, you can put some more gathering stitches. I found that with this fabric, similar to how we did with the collar, I did not need them. So I did not put gathering stitches here, but you can put some gathering stitches to make sure that everything aligns, but you want to make sure that your notches and your dots match. And then you're going to sew this all together with 3/8, or I'm sorry, with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, so I've gone ahead and sewn one of my facing pieces in, making sure that I pivoted at that notch. Here was a dot here and a dot here. This is where the pivot point is, and it sewed all the way towards the shoulder seam. This is where that folded over edge kind of matches up with the shoulder seam, and I can tack that down. But one thing that the pattern doesn't ask for, but I do, I find that it just provides a better finish, is I do understitch my facing. So opening it up, you can see that I understitched to the dot, or to the notch, it's understitched the seam allowance to the facing piece itself. Then I clipped at my notch, not through my main construction stitching, but to it. And then I stitched everything else towards the actual body of the garment. Because when you get past that notch, that is where, like, this is what's going to show mostly. So my understitching is on that bottom side. It just makes sure that nothing is going to roll out, and it gives me a nice flat finish when I'm done. So now we're going to do the other side. And then I will tack in my shoulders and turn this neck edge in so that I can edge stitch the top part of my collar to the neck edge. And then we'll start working on the sleeves. So I just have this kind of laying down, but we have both of our facings in. I went ahead and stitched along the back of my neck piece. So that is all encased. The only thing I have not done yet is tack down the edges of my facing. Sometimes I wait a little bit later in the process to do that. But as you can see here, we have our notches here. They look nice and crisp. I'm really excited about how this is going to look. But again, my side seams and everything are still open, and we are going to start working on our sleeve. So now we're going to start with our sleeves, and the first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that we are working on our continuous lap. So this does not have a traditional placket, but uses a continuous lap with basically a piece of binding, which is piece number 7. To start with, we are going to mark out the slash line as well as the stitching lines on our fabric. So the way that I do this, on the wrong side of my fabric, when I am cutting my pattern, I make a longer like slit so I know where my slash line is, and then I take one of my friction pins and I mark out my stitching line. What we're now going to do is I'm going to run a line of stitching up and back down along that line so that I can then cut it open and we can start working to attach the actual piece of bias. All right, so I went ahead and did my line of stitching, sliced it open. I then took piece number 7, which is one of my continuous lap pieces, and I went ahead and pressed down a 1/4 inch on the unmarked edge. So one edge, we can look at the pattern piece, has the dots. I took this edge here and pressed under a 1/4 inch. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this piece, we're going to put it, and it's going to look a little funky because it is going to be right side of my continuous lap to wrong side of this, and we're going to pin, making sure that those dots line up. And let's say this is one place that if you don't put a dot, it's okay. What I like to do is making sure that I just make sure that my pieces line up and that this all lines up together along the edge. I will go and pin this in place, and I will sew along at 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Just a line of stitching across this. So now that we've done that, what I can now do, remove this last pin, is we will now work to take this, press it, and then fold it right on top like that, so that I can then edge stitch it along this edge. So after going ahead and doing that edge stitching along this edge, what I then went ahead and did was took it kind of while it was folded together and did a line of diagonal stitching from the top right down to that corner, and then folded back this edge along the bottom edge with the notch on the same side as the notch, so that that can then be folded inwards, giving it the look and shape of like a regular placket. I'm going to press it out a little bit here just to make sure that that is nice and tight. But once we have done with this, we can start working on the other sleeve. Now, as another part of the preparation set, depending on your fabric, you might want to do some gathering stitches along the top edge of your shirt. So along this edge, basically from notch to double notch. I find, again, with this fabric, as long as I make sure that I have my dots marked, which I have marked through small slashes, and able to line them up with the sleeve head of the actual shirt, I'm able to easily install the sleeves without the easing stitches. But you might need to use them depending on your fabric. To start installing the sleeves flat, what I do is I go and pin my sleeves and right sides together, making sure I first match my notches. So there is my double notch for the back and my notch for the front. Pin that there. Then I pin the edges as well. And then I make small little slash marks where I have the dots, and I match those up as well. So it helps in easing in the fabric. Now, if you're following the pattern, another way that you can do this is you can run a line of gathering stitches from double notch to notch, 2 rows of that, so that you can easily ease it in. Whatever works best for you is what I would suggest you go with. Now, after this, I like to go ahead and run this through my serger along the edge just to finish everything up. Another option is that you can do this with a French seam, where you sew first at 1/4 of an inch, trim it down, press it over, and you will sew those wrong sides together, and then sew it right sides together at 3/8 of an inch to give you a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Do what works best for you and what gives you the finish that you want. But what I'm about to do is I'm about to sew in my sleeve heads, 5/8 inch seam allowance, right sides together, and then serge it. All right, so we have our sleeves all sewn in. And I've gone ahead and finished my edges with some serging. And then I pressed my seam allowance towards my sleeve itself. And especially as I'm trying to get this curve, I use a pressing ham just to make sure that I am pressing that appropriately as the fabric and stuff is already curving. You want to try to match that curve as you're pressing it. Now we're going to start putting together our side seams. The way that I like to do it, you can do it again, right sides together, matching our notches, and we're going to start from our sleeve. So we're going to start at the bottom, then we're going to match up our notch here. I like to then make sure that I'm matching up this seam juncture. I make sure that they're, of course, pressed flat towards the sleeve itself and put a pin right there to hold that all together. Match my next set of notches. And then match the bottom and pin that together, and add any other pins that I need along the way. We're then going to sew that at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to finish this with serging as well. Another option again is that you can French seam this. So you would be putting this first wrong sides together, sewing it at either 1/4 or 3/8 of an inch, trimming down, pressing, and then folding out and sewing again at either a 3/8 or the 1/4 of an inch. So I will pin this together, sew this up, and we'll be back as we sew on the cuffs. So now that our side seams are put together, as well as our sleeve, and I've gone ahead and pressed the seam allowance towards the back of the shirt, it's now time to install our cuff. So, looking at the instructions, what you will do is you will take your cuff piece and press under a 1/2 inch on the unnotched edge and then trim that down. You will then put your cuff right sides together. Probably need the other cuff here. Matching our notches. Edged. And you should have a little bit of around 5/8 of an inch here. This side. Same on the other side. But you'll be matching your notches. And we're going to sew our cuff on right sides together at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, that is the traditional way to do it. Making shirts for a while and trying some other different patterns, what I have come to like to do is I like to take my cuff and install it from the inside. So I'm putting my cuff piece right sides to the wrong side of my shirt, and then installing it that way. That way, when it comes down for me to make the cuff, you fold it down and do that. But as you turn it over, this folded edge is on the outside of your cuff and you can just edge stitch it in place. I find that it just gives a cleaner finish when I do that, but you can follow the normal way and install it right sides together. So let's do our first line of stitching to install our cuff piece to our shirt, and then we'll be right back. So once I went ahead and sewed on my cuff, I'm going to press my seam allowances down towards the cuff itself, and we are going to fold the cuff back on itself right sides together along the fold line I'm going to put a pin right here. I'm going to sew right along this edge and then trim the seam. Now, if you did this the normal way that you would do a cuff with it right sides together, it is the same procedure. Mine just looks backwards. But we're going to sew this down on either side and then trim the seam. So after sewing down the side of my cuff, I trimmed down the seam and pressed it out, making sure that my seam allowances are pressed down and everything is nice and flat. I can then go ahead and edge stitch this. I think I like this method just because I can see where I'm stitching and making sure I'm catching everything in place. And especially since this is only turned up a ½ inch, it's going to give me a nice amount of fabric that I'm biting as I am turning this cuff out. Once you have done that on both sides and did that edge stitching, you are now ready to finish a shirt. So now that we have our cuffs all done and top stitched and everything is all together, what you can now do is use your pattern piece for the cuff number 8, as well as piece 1 to mark your buttonhole placements on your cuff, which will have 2 buttonholes along that front edge here, as well as the 4 buttonholes along the front. Now, one of the great things about this pattern is because of the size, the buttons are prominent, so you can really have some fun with some buttons. As I'm up here literally trying to decide what I'm about to use. So you can go with a bold basic style, or you can even go a little fun with a nice figural button print. After doing your buttons and stuff like that, you will focus on hemming your shirt. Now, to get your hem together, the first thing that you will do is you're going to fold this back on itself and do a line of top stitching so that you can, or a line of stitching right along the edge. Now you can follow the actual hem measurements that are stated by the pattern. I know that I'm going to want mine a little bit longer, so I'm probably going to use this 5/8 of an inch to sew this on, and then I'm going to turn up the rest of my shirt to match and finish my shirt. And that concludes Know Me 2079 View A. Hopefully you will come back for the next video, which will focus on View B, the pants.